Personal log entry 1, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date 3.847M41. Location, transit vessel Undying Resolve. Servo-skull Unit 77 Alpha, begin recording. Authorization, Golter Theta 997. My name is Valdeon Golter, Acolyte to Inquisitor Bastion Chaos of the Ordo Sepulchrum. I speak these words as I travel aboard the transport vessel Undying Resolve toward the shrine world of Kathur in the Segmentum Obscurus. My master has tasked me with investigating reports of what local authorities are calling a zombie plague outbreak in Hive Mortius, the planetary capital. The briefing was sparse, as is often the case with inquisitorial assignments. 3 weeks ago, Vox transmissions from Kathur began reporting incidents of the dead rising to attack the living. The planetary governor, one Thaddeus Vex, initially dismissed these as local superstitions amplified by the typical hysteria of hive dwellers. However, when an entire hab block went dark and subsequent investigation teams failed to report back, the situation was escalated to the Adeptus Arbites. The Arbites' initial reports were troubling: bodies found in various states of decay, showing signs of having been mobile post-mortem, bite marks on survivors, witnesses speaking of corpses that would not stay dead even after suffering what should have been fatal wounds. The local arbitrator, Marcus Voss, was wise enough to recognize the potential for heretical influence and contacted the nearest inquisitorial representative. That representative was my master, Inquisitor Chaos. Unfortunately, he is currently engaged in purging a gene-stealer cult on Mordian Prime and cannot personally attend to this matter. Hence, my deployment to Kathur. I am traveling light. My standard kit includes my bolt pistol, power sword, Auspex scanner, portable Vox unit, and of course, this servo-skull for data recording. I've also brought a supply of blessed ammunition and a small shrine to the Emperor for daily prayers. The ship's captain estimates we'll reach Kathur within 6 standard days. I must admit, despite my training and previous assignments, the prospect of facing the walking dead fills me with unease. The Emperor protects. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 2. Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date 5.847M4. Location, transit vessel Undying Resolve, Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. We experienced a minor incident during our journey yesterday that I feel compelled to document. While reviewing the available data on Kathur in my quarters, I was approached by Chief Petty Officer Corman, one of the ship's senior crew members. He seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as he spoke. "Begging your pardon, Lord Inquisitor," he began, using the incorrect title despite my corrections, "but the crew's been talking about where we're headed. Some of the lads are saying it's cursed." I questioned him about the source of these superstitions. Corman explained that Kathur has long been rumored among voidfarers to be plagued by strange occurrences. I dismissed Corman's concerns, reminding him that superstition is the enemy of imperial truth and that spreading such tales borders on heresy. However, I cannot deny that his words have added to my own unease about this assignment. I spent the remainder of the day reviewing what additional information I could find about Kathur. The planet houses several major cathedrals and is a significant pilgrimage destination. The population of approximately 12 billion souls is concentrated primarily in 3 hive cities: Mortius, the capital, Sanctus Majoris, and Throne's End. What troubles me is the lack of recent reports from the world. For a shrine world of such importance, the amount of communication with the broader Imperium seems surprisingly minimal. The last significant record I can find dates back nearly a decade, when a contingent of Sisters of Battle visited to consecrate a new cathedral. Even their reports were unusually brief. I have also reviewed the tactical data on Hive Mortius. Like most Imperial Hive cities, it's a massive structure reaching high into the atmosphere, housing billions of souls in cramped conditions. The upper spires house the nobility and important imperial officials, while the lower levels descend into increasingly squalid conditions until reaching the Underhive, a realm of criminals, mutants, and worse. If a plague outbreak has occurred, it would most likely have started in the lower levels where sanitation is poorest and Imperial oversight minimal. However, for it to have reached the attention of the planetary governor, it must have spread significantly upward through the Hive's levels. Tomorrow we reach Kathur. I have spent this evening in prayer, asking the Emperor to grant me the strength and wisdom to serve his will, whatever horrors await me on that world. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 3, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date 6.847M41. Location Kathur system, approaching orbital station Sanctus. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. We have arrived in the Kathur system, and my first impressions are deeply troubling. As we approached the planet, I observed its orbital defenses and traffic patterns from the observation deck. For a shrine world that should be bustling with pilgrimage vessels and trade ships, space around Kathur is surprisingly empty. Orbital Station Sanctus, the primary orbital facility, responded to our hails with unusual delay. When contact was finally established, the station's communications officer sounded strained, almost fearful. He requested our identification and purpose multiple times, as if he hadn't heard our initial transmission. When I invoked my inquisitorial authority, there was a long pause before we were granted docking clearance. The approach to the station revealed signs of recent combat. Several sections showed damage from last fire, and I observed what appeared to be makeshift barricades at various docking bays. Captain Voss of the Undying Resolve mentioned that the station's defensive turrets were tracking our approach with unusual intensity. Upon docking, I was met by Station Commander Alexius Thorn, a nervous man who immediately apologized for the delays in our arrival clearance. His explanation was disturbing. 3 days ago, a pilgrimage vessel had docked carrying what they initially believed to be plague victims. However, these victims had attacked the medical personnel attempting to treat them. They were dead, Lord Acolyte, Thorn explained, his voice barely above a whisper. I saw them myself, corpses walking and biting like wild animals. We lost 6 station personnel before we managed to contain the situation. The entire docking bay had to be sealed and purged with flame. I questioned him about the origin of the infected vessel. It had departed from Kathur's surface only hours before attempting to dock. The ship's manifest indicated it was carrying pilgrims returning from a visit to the Cathedral of St. Keeler in Hive Mortius. This information confirms my worst fears about the situation planetside. If the infection has reached the point where fleeing pilgrims are carrying it off-world, then the outbreak is far more advanced than the initial reports suggested. Commander Thorn has arranged for a shuttle to take me to the surface. However, he strongly advised against it, stating that all communication with the planet's surface has been sporadic at best over the past week. The last clear transmission from Hive Mortius was 2 days ago, and it consisted only of a desperate plea for orbital bombardment of the Hive's lower levels. I have decided to proceed with the mission despite these warnings. The Emperor's work must be done, regardless of personal risk. However, I have requested that the shuttle remain in orbit as an emergency extraction point should the situation prove untenable. Before departing the station, I witnessed something that has left me deeply disturbed. While walking through the station's central corridor, I observed a group of pilgrims who had apparently been stranded here when regular transport to the surface was suspended. They appeared to be conducting some form of prayer service, but their chanting was in no language I recognized. When I approached to investigate, they fell silent and dispersed with suspicious haste. One of them, an elderly woman with the ritual scars of a devoted pilgrim, remained behind. She looked at me with eyes that seemed to hold terrible knowledge. "The saint weeps tears of blood," she said. "The blessed dead rise to serve, but they serve a different master now." Before I could question her further, she hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I depart for Kathur's surface within the hour. Emperor, protect me. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 4, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 6.847M41. Location: Shuttlecraft, Pious Descent. Approaching Kathur's surface. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. As I descend toward Kathur's surface, the scope of the catastrophe is becoming clear. From orbital altitude, I can observe massive fires burning throughout Hive Mortius. Entire sections of the Hive appear to be dark, with no signs of activity or illumination. The normal streams of aircraft traffic between the Hive spires are conspicuously absent. Pilot Sergeant Corrin, assigned to my transport by Station Commander Thorn, has been attempting to contact the planetary authorities throughout our descent. The responses have been fragmented and often contradictory. The Planetary Governor's Office claims the situation is under control, while the Adeptus Arbites are requesting immediate military intervention. Most disturbing of all, we've intercepted Vox transmissions from what appear to be Imperial Guard units requesting permission to withdraw from the Hive entirely. "This is Colonel Doven of the 47th Kathur Defense Force," came one transmission. "We are unable to hold position at level 157. The enemy, they just keep coming. We've had to fall back to level 180, requesting immediate reinforcement or evacuation authorization." Another transmission, this one from an arbitrator. "Precinct Fortress Gamma is compromised. The cells, Emperor preserve us, they opened the cells to evacuate the prisoners, but they were already dead and walking. We've sealed the fortress, but we can hear them in the walls. Our planned landing zone is Spire Majoris, the governmental center of Hive Mortius. However, as we approached, Sergeant Corrin reported that the landing pad's beacon was not responding. Visual observation showed significant damage to the spire's upper levels, with what appeared to be barricades blocking many of the normal access points. We have diverted to Landing Bay 7 Gamma in the middle levels of the Hive, a commercial district that should provide safer access to the governmental areas. However, as we circle the landing zone, I can see crowds of people in the streets below. From this altitude, it's impossible to determine if they are refugees seeking shelter or something far worse. Sergeant Corrin has expressed reluctance to land, suggesting that we return to orbit and request a full Imperial Guard deployment. I have overruled his concerns, reminding him that the Emperor's work cannot wait for bureaucratic process. However, I have instructed him to remain with the shuttle and be prepared for immediate departure should I signal for extraction. I am reviewing my equipment one final time. Bolt pistol loaded with blessed ammunition, power sword charged and consecrated, Auspex scanner calibrated for biological anomalies, Vox units set to emergency channels, and additional supplies in my pack. Most importantly, servo-skull 77 Alpha is functioning perfectly and will maintain constant recording of my investigation. We are beginning our final approach to the landing bay. I can see the area more clearly now, and what I observe fills me with dread. The landing bay appears to be littered with debris and what might be bodies. The normal ground crew that should be guiding us to a safe landing position is nowhere to be seen. Emperor, grant me strength for what lies ahead. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording, personal log entry 5, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date: 6.847M41. Location: Landing Bay 7 Gamma, Hive Mortius, Kathur. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. I have landed in what can only be described as a vision of hell. Landing Bay 7 Gamma is a charnel house. Bodies are scattered across the ferrocrete surface, many showing signs of violent death. What is worse, some of these bodies are still moving. Upon exiting the shuttle, I immediately detected the stench of death and decay that permeates the air. My Auspex scanner began registering biological anomalies immediately, life signs that fluctuate between active and dormant in patterns I have never encountered before. The first of the infected I encountered was a dock worker, still wearing his landing bay uniform. Half of his face had been torn away, revealing bone and rotting tissue beneath. Despite wounds that should have been immediately fatal, he was attempting to walk toward our shuttle with stiff, uncoordinated movements. I ended his suffering with a single bolt round to the head, which finally brought him down permanently. Sergeant Corran witnessed this encounter and became visibly shaken. "Emperor's mercy," he whispered. "That man has been dead for days. How is this possible?" I ordered him to secure the shuttle and prepare for immediate departure while I conducted my investigation. The landing bay's control tower showed signs of a desperate last stand, barricades made of cargo containers, spent ammunition casings scattered across the floor, and bloodstains on every surface. Inside the control tower, I found the duty officer, Senior Petty Officer Marcus Vane, still alive, but in a state of near-complete psychological breakdown. He was huddled in a corner, clutching a lasgun and muttering prayers to the Emperor. When I identified myself as an inquisitorial representative, he broke down completely. "They came up from the lower levels," he sobbed. "Hundreds of them, dead things, walking dead things. They overran the cargo depot in level 142 3 days ago. We tried to contain them, set up kill zones, but they just kept coming. Lars fire barely slows them down, and when you put one down, 2 more take its place." I questioned him about the nature of these creatures, but his responses were largely incoherent. He described bodies that continued to function despite massive trauma, wounds that bled black ichor instead of blood, and a hunger that drove them to attack any living thing they encountered. Most disturbing was his account of how the infection spreads. According to Vane, those killed by the infected don't stay dead. Within hours, sometimes minutes, they rise again as part of the shambling horde. This explains the rapid expansion of the outbreak. Each casualty becomes a new vector for the plague. I left Vane with instructions to maintain his position and await further orders. His mental state makes him unreliable, but he represents the first eyewitness account I've obtained. His description matches certain heretical plagues I've studied in my training, though none quite fit this exact pattern of symptoms. My Auspex continues to register anomalous readings throughout the landing bay. The device is detecting life signs in areas where I can see only corpses, suggesting that some of the apparently dead bodies may still pose a threat. I've decided to proceed to the Hive's administrative levels to contact the planetary authorities and gather more information about the scope of this outbreak. The commercial district surrounding Landing Bay 7 Gamma tells a story of rapid evacuation followed by chaos. Shop fronts are smashed, vehicles abandoned in the middle of roadways, and personal belongings scattered across the streets. Many of the buildings show signs of hasty fortification, furniture barricaded against doors, windows boarded up from the inside. I've encountered several more of the infected during my movement through the district. Each engagement has taught me something about their capabilities and weaknesses. They show no apparent intelligence or tactical awareness, simply moving toward any source of noise or movement. However, they are remarkably resilient to damage. I've seen them continue attacking even after losing limbs or suffering massive torso wounds. The most effective method of stopping them appears to be catastrophic damage to the head or complete destruction of the spinal column. My blessed bolt rounds are particularly effective, often causing the entire skull to explode. However, I'm concerned about ammunition conservation given the scale of the outbreak. What troubles me most is the complete absence of living survivors in this district. I've searched several buildings that show signs of recent habitation, but found only corpses in various states of decay. Either the living have all fled to other areas of the hive, or the infection rate is approaching 100% in the affected zones. I am now approaching the entrance to Transport Hub Delta, which should provide access to the hive's maglev system and allow me to reach the administrative spires. However, my Auspex is registering massive biological activity ahead, far more than I've encountered thus far. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording, personal log entry 6. Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 6.847M41. Location, Transport Hub Delta, Level 145, Hive Mortius, servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. Transport Hub Delta has become a massacre site of unprecedented proportions. The main concourse, normally capable of holding thousands of commuters, is now filled with bodies. The floor is slick with blood and other bodily fluids, and the stench of decay is so overwhelming that I've had to adjust my rebreather settings. What makes this scene particularly horrifying is that many of the bodies are still moving. Hundreds of the infected wander aimlessly through the concourse, occasionally clustering around sources of noise or movement. They appear to be drawn to each other in some fashion, forming loose groups that move together like a grotesque parody of the crowds that once filled this space during normal operations. I've taken position in an elevated observation platform overlooking the main concourse to study their behavior patterns. The infected show no recognition of their former humanity. Their physical capabilities vary significantly. Freshly infected individuals retain most of their motor functions and can move with surprising speed and coordination. However, as decay progresses, their movements become increasingly rough and uncoordinated. Some of the more advanced cases can barely walk, dragging themselves along the ground with their arms. What unifies them all is an absolute lack of self-preservation instinct and an insatiable hunger for living flesh. I observed one infected individual continue to attack a security barrier even as the electrified fencing burned away most of the flesh on its hands, leaving only charred bone to scratch uselessly at the metal. The maglev transportation system appears to be completely non-functional. The platforms are littered with damaged train cars, some of which show signs of battles fought between the infected and transportation authorities. One car contains what appears to be the remains of an arbitrator patrol, their carapace armor torn open, weapons scattered, and bodies partially consumed. I've managed to access one of the hub's security terminals, though the machine spirit seems corrupted, displaying data in erratic patterns. The last logged entries paint a clear picture of how quickly the situation deteriorated. 3 days ago, the first reports of violent passengers were recorded. Within 12 hours, the entire transportation network was reporting widespread civil unrest. By the second day, all scheduled services had been suspended and emergency protocols were in effect. The final entry, time-stamped just 18 hours ago, consists of a single line, Emperor Protect US. With the maglev system offline, I'll need to find alternative routes to reach the administrative levels. The emergency stairwells should provide access, though climbing nearly 40 levels while avoiding the infected will be extremely dangerous. Before leaving the observation platform, I made a disturbing discovery. Among the wandering infected below, I spotted several individuals wearing the uniforms of Planetary Defense Forces and Adeptus Arbites. These are trained fighters who fell to the plague despite their equipment and training. If professional soldiers cannot contain this outbreak, the situation is far more dire than even my worst expectations. I've also noticed that the infected seem to be showing some form of primitive coordination. While individually they appear mindless, in groups they sometimes move in patterns that suggest a collective intelligence. I observed a cluster of them working together to break down a barricaded door, with some pushing while others pulled at loose materials. This behavior is deeply troubling and suggests the plague may be more than a simple reanimation of dead tissue. My Vox unit has been picking up fragmented transmissions from throughout the hive. Most are desperate calls for help or evacuation requests, but a few contain information about safe zones and evacuation points. The planetary governor's palace in Spire Majoris is apparently still under Imperial control, protected by a combination of remaining PDF forces and palace guards. I've decided to attempt to reach Spire Majoris through the emergency access routes. If I can make contact with Governor Vex and his staff, I might be able to coordinate a more effective response to this crisis. However, my immediate priority must be gathering more intelligence about the nature and origin of this plague. As I prepare to leave Transport Hub Delta, I cannot shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Several times I've caught movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turn to investigate, I see only the mindless wandering of the infected. Yet the sensation persists, as if something with greater intelligence is observing my movements. Emperor, grant me strength for the trials ahead. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 7, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 6.847M41. Location, Emergency Stairwell 7 Alpha, Level 150, Hive Mortius. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. The emergency stairwells have provided a relatively clear path upward through the hive, though the journey has not been without incident. These passages were designed for evacuation scenarios and are built to higher security standards than the normal corridors. However, they were never intended to contain a threat like this plague. I've encountered several groups of survivors during my ascent, though calling them survivors may be overly optimistic. The first group I encountered on level 147 consisted of 3 hive workers who had barricaded themselves in a utility closet for the past 2 days. They were in an advanced state of dehydration and panic, but physically unharmed. Their leader, Foreman Cross, provided valuable intelligence about the early stages of the outbreak. According to his account, the plague began in the Underhive, specifically in the sink districts, where the hive's poorest residents live in conditions barely suitable for human habitation. Initial reports described it as some form of viral outbreak causing violent behavior in the infected. The first word we got was 3 weeks ago, Cross explained. Arbitrators went down to investigate reports of cannibalism in Sink District 7. None of them came back up. Then more arbitrators went down, and they didn't come back either. That's when they started sealing off the Underhive access points. This timeline suggests the outbreak has been developing for far longer than the reports reaching the Inquisition indicated. If the plague has had 3 weeks to spread through the Underhive's vast population, the number of infected could be in the millions. Cross also mentioned something that has left me deeply troubled. The plague doesn't seem to be spreading randomly. According to him, certain districts and social groups were affected much more rapidly than others. The shrine districts, where the most devout citizens live and work, were among the last to be evacuated. Meanwhile, areas known for harboring criminals and heretics were overrun almost immediately. I've left Cross and his companions with instructions to continue moving upward and attempt to reach the evacuation zones in the upper spires. Their chances of survival are minimal, but they deserve the opportunity to try. The second group I encountered was far less fortunate. On level 152, I discovered what remained of an arbitrator patrol that had been attempting to establish a defensive position. Judge Caster Vex, the senior surviving officer, had been bitten during an engagement with the infected 12 hours earlier. When I found him, Vex was still alive, but showing clear signs of infection. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, his eyes were becoming cloudy, and he was running a severe fever. Most disturbing of all, he reported an increasing hunger that normal food could not satisfy. "I can feel it changing me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something crawling under my skin, in my thoughts. Emperor, forgive me, but when I look at you, part of me wants to feed." I granted Judge Vex the Emperor's mercy with a single bolt round before he could fully succumb to the infection. However, his account of the plague's progression has provided crucial intelligence. The transformation from infection to full manifestation appears to take approximately 12 to 18 hours, during which the victim retains their consciousness, but gradually loses their humanity. The stairwell system has also revealed the scope of the evacuation efforts. Evidence of hasty retreats is everywhere: abandoned equipment, bloodstains, and makeshift barricades that were clearly overwhelmed. Most telling are the blast doors that have been welded shut from the upper side, sealing off entire sections of the hive to prevent the plague's spread. My Auspex readings have become increasingly erratic as I climb higher. The device is registering biological anomalies that don't correspond to any known life forms. The patterns suggest massive bacterial or viral activity, but with an organization and purpose that seems almost intelligent. I've also begun detecting electromagnetic anomalies that my training tells me may indicate warp taint. If this plague has some connection to the Immaterium, it would explain its resistance to conventional weapons and its apparent disregard for normal biological constraints. On level 158, I discovered something that has shaken my faith in the Imperial response to this crisis. A sealed chamber contained the bodies of what appeared to be a research team, tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, based on their augmentations and equipment. They had been studying samples of infected tissue before succumbing to the plague themselves. Their research data, still accessible through their cogitator systems, reveals that this is no ordinary viral outbreak. The plague appears to be a hybrid of biological and warp-based corruption, creating a form of pseudolife that defies normal classification. The infected are not truly alive, but neither are they simply reanimated corpses. They exist in a state between life and death that may be sustained by warp energy. More disturbing still, the research suggests that the plague is not random, but purposeful. It seems designed to create a self-sustaining army of the undead that grows stronger with each victim it claims. If this assessment is correct, then Kathur may be facing not just a plague outbreak, but a form of coordinated attack using biological weapons of heretical origin. I am now approaching level 165, where my Vox unit is detecting active Imperial transmissions. If Emperor willing, I will soon make contact with the remaining planetary authorities and be able to coordinate a proper response to this crisis. However, I cannot shake the growing certainty that whatever force unleashed this plague is still active on Kathur, and that my investigation is leading me directly into its grasp. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 8, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum, date 6.847M41. Location, Imperial Command Post, level 165, Hive Mortius. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. I have reached the Imperial Command Post established on level 165, though what I found here fills me with despair rather than hope. The facility has been hastily constructed in what was once a commercial district, using cargo containers and prefabricated walls to create a fortified position. However, it's clear that this is not a base for launching a counterattack, but rather a staging area for evacuation. Colonel Marcus Doven of the 47th Kathur Defense Force is the senior Imperial officer present, commanding a mixed force of PDF troopers, arbitrators, and civilian militia. When I presented my inquisitorial credentials, he received me with a mixture of relief and desperation. "Thank the Emperor you're here," he said immediately. "We've been requesting inquisitorial intervention for days. This situation is beyond our capabilities to contain." Colonel Doven's briefing painted a picture of complete military failure. The 47th Kathur Defense Force, numbering approximately 8,000 troops at full strength, has been reduced to fewer than 600 effective personnel. Multiple companies have been completely overrun, while others have simply ceased reporting and are presumed lost. "It's not a war," Doven explained. "Wars have strategies, objectives, something you can plan against. This is just consumption. They don't stop, don't retreat, don't show fear. We can kill hundreds of them, but for every one we put down, 2 more take its place. And when our own men fall—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Every Imperial casualty becomes part of the enemy force, creating a mathematical impossibility where victory becomes increasingly unlikely with each engagement. The command post's tactical displays show the current state of Hive Mortius. Approximately 60% of the Hive's levels are now classified as infected zones, where no living Imperial forces remain. The infection appears to be spreading upward at a rate of roughly 1 level every 6 hours, despite increasingly desperate defensive efforts. Most troubling is the pattern of the spread. Rather than expanding randomly outward from initial infection points, the plague seems to be targeting specific objectives. Communication centers, power distribution nodes, and transportation hubs have all been overrun with suspicious coordination. This suggests that whatever intelligence is directing the outbreak has detailed knowledge of the Hive's infrastructure. I questioned Colonel Doven about the origin point of the plague. His intelligence indicates that the outbreak began simultaneously in 3 different Underhive locations: Sink District 7, the old cathedral ruins, and the ancient necropolis known as the Bone Gardens. This multi-point origin strongly suggests coordinated planning rather than a natural occurrence. "We've lost contact with the Planetary Governor's Palace 6 hours ago," Doven reported. Last transmission indicated they were under siege by infected forces that had somehow reached the upper spires. "We don't know if Governor Vex is still alive." This information has forced me to reconsider my priorities. If the planetary government has fallen, then there may be no remaining imperial authority capable of coordinating an effective response. The situation has progressed beyond local containment and will require immediate intervention from off-world imperial forces. However, my primary duty remains unchanged. I must determine the nature and origin of this plague so that proper countermeasures can be implemented. The evidence increasingly points to some form of coordinated attack using heretical biological weapons, possibly with warp taint involvement. While at the command post, I've had the opportunity to interview several survivors from the lower levels. Their accounts are consistent and deeply disturbing. The infected show signs of coordination that goes beyond simple pack behavior. Survivors report seeing them work together to overcome obstacles, set primitive ambushes, and even use tools in basic ways. Trooper Vance of the 3rd Company described an engagement where infected individuals appeared to be herding his unit into a killing zone. "They came at us from 3 directions, but not all at once. First group drove us back, second group blocked our retreat route, then the third group hit us from the side. It was like they were working from a plan. If the infected retain some form of tactical intelligence, it would explain their success against trained Imperial forces. However, it also suggests that the plague may be more than simple reanimation. It might be creating a form of hive mind among the infected population. I've made the decision to descend back into the infected zones to investigate the original outbreak sites. Colonel Doven has strongly advised against this course of action, pointing out that no Imperial force sent into those areas has ever returned. However, as an Inquisitorial Acolyte, I cannot let fear override my duty to uncover the truth. Before departing, I've instructed Colonel Doven to prepare for immediate evacuation of all remaining Imperial personnel. If my investigation confirms that this outbreak cannot be contained by conventional means, the only remaining option will be orbital bombardment of the entire hive. I've also left sealed orders to be transmitted to Inquisitor Chaos if I fail to return within 24 hours. These orders contain my preliminary findings and recommendation for immediate deployment of inquisitorial forces to Kathur, along with authorization for exterminatus protocols if the situation proves irredeemable. Emperor, if I am to die in service to your will, let my death serve some purpose in protecting the Imperium from this abomination. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 9. Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 7.847 M41. Location, Sink District 7, Underhive Level 23, Hive Mortius. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. I have descended into the heart of the outbreak, and what I have discovered here defies all rational explanation. Sink District 7, one of the identified origin points of the plague, has been transformed into something that resembles a cathedral of the damned more than a residential area. The journey to reach this level took nearly 4 hours, navigating through increasingly damaged sections of the hive. The normal infrastructure has been systematically destroyed or corrupted. Power conduits have been torn open, and their contents used to create strange geometric patterns on the walls. Water pipes have been redirected to form channels that flow with a black, viscous liquid that my Auspex identifies as contaminated blood mixed with unknown organic compounds. The infected population in these lower levels is far more numerous and organized than anything I encountered above. They move in coordinated groups, some numbering in the hundreds, following routes that seem predetermined rather than random. Most disturbing of all, they appear to be engaged in construction activities. Using rubble, bodies, and scavenged materials, the infected have built elaborate structures throughout the district. These constructions follow no architectural logic I recognize, but they clearly serve some purpose. Many resemble altars or shrines, decorated with human remains arranged in complex patterns. Others appear to be incubation chambers where newly infected individuals are brought to complete their transformation. At the center of Sync District 7, I discovered what can only be described as a temple. The infected have cleared a massive space in what was once a residential block and constructed an elaborate ziggurat from human bones, reaching nearly 20 meters in height. The structure pulses with a sickly green light that emanates from within the bone walls. The temple is constantly attended by hundreds of infected who move around it in ritualistic patterns. Unlike the mindless shambling I observed in the upper levels, these infected show clear signs of purpose and organization. They work together to maintain the structure, bringing fresh bones and bodies to add to its construction. At the apex of the temple sits a figure that I can only assume is the source of this abomination. From my observation point, I can see that it was once human, but has been so transformed by the plague that it barely retains a humanoid shape. Its body appears to be partially decomposed, yet somehow still functional, with additional appendages that seem to have grown from the torso and head. This central figure, I hesitate to call it human anymore, appears to be directing the activities of the infected through some form of psychic communion. I have observed it gesture toward different groups of infected, who then immediately change their behavior patterns in response. This confirms my suspicion that the plague creates some form of hive mind among its victims. What makes this discovery truly heretical is the presence of chaos iconography throughout the temple complex. The bone arrangements incorporate symbols that I recognize from my inquisitorial training as being associated with Nurgle, the chaos god of plague and decay. This is no natural outbreak. It is a deliberate act of corruption designed to create a beachhead for chaos influence on Kathur. My Auspex readings have become completely erratic in proximity to the temple. The device registers massive warp energy signatures that fluctuate in patterns suggesting active demon presence. If my training is correct, this temple may be functioning as a gateway, allowing chaos entities to manifest in real space. I've attempted to get closer to the temple for a more detailed examination, but the infected appear to be maintaining some form of perimeter guard. Unlike their behavior in other areas, they seem actively aware of potential threats to their central structure. I've observed them positioning themselves to block access routes and maintaining watch patterns that suggest genuine intelligence rather than instinctive behavior. The implications of what I've discovered are staggering. Kathur is not simply suffering from a plague outbreak. It is being deliberately transformed into a chaos-held world. The infected are not just victims of the plague, but willing servants of Nurgle engaged in some form of ritual construction project. If this temple is allowed to reach completion, it could serve as a permanent gate, allowing unlimited demon incursions into Imperial space. The entire Kathur system, and potentially the surrounding sectors, would be at risk of chaos corruption. I must find a way to reach the temple's central figure and determine the exact nature of the ritual being performed. However, doing so will almost certainly mean moving through hundreds of organized infected who are actively defending their position. My chances of survival are minimal, but the intelligence I could gather might be crucial for any Imperial counterattack. Before attempting this reconnaissance, I need to investigate the other origin points to determine if similar temple complexes have been constructed there. If Nurgle's servants have established multiple ritual sites, the situation may already be beyond redemption. Emperor, protect me, for I walk now in the shadow of chaos itself. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 10, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum, date 7.847M41. Location, Old Cathedral Ruins, Underhive Level 19, Hive Mortius. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. The old cathedral ruins have revealed the true scope of the heresy that has befallen Kathur. What I have discovered here surpasses even my worst fears about the nature of this outbreak. The ruins themselves date back to the early imperial settlement of Kathur, when the world was first designated as a shrine world. According to the historical records I've accessed, this cathedral was dedicated to the worship of the emperor and served the spiritual needs of the original colonists. However, it was abandoned and sealed when the great cathedrals of the upper spires were constructed, deemed too small and poorly positioned for the growing population. Now, the infected have reopened this sacred space and transformed it into a monument to blasphemy. The original imperial iconography has been defaced and corrupted, with holy symbols of the emperor replaced by the 8-pointed star of chaos and the specific markings of Nurgle. The altar, once dedicated to imperial saints, now supports a massive cauldron that bubbles with what appears to be liquefied human remains. The central figure here is different from the one I observed in Sync District 7, but no less horrifying. This entity appears to have been a member of the ecclesiarchy in life. I can still make out remnants of priestly robes and religious ornaments among the corruption that has overtaken its body. However, it has been transformed into something that mocks everything the imperial cult represents. This corrupted priest, for lack of a better term, is conducting what can only be described as a black mass. Hundreds of infected gather in the cathedral's nave, while the entity performs rituals that involve the systematic desecration of imperial relics. I have watched it tear apart illuminated manuscripts of imperial prayers and feed the pages into the bubbling cauldron while chanting in what I believe to be the demonic tongue. Most disturbing of all, this ritual appears to be affecting the infected who observe it. As the ceremony progresses, I can observe physical changes in the gathered crowd. Their decomposition appears to halt or even reverse slightly, their movements become more coordinated, and they begin to show signs of greater intelligence and purpose. This suggests that the plague is not simply reanimating the dead, but rather transforming them into something new, a hybrid between human consciousness and demonic possession that retains enough intelligence to serve chaos goals while being completely subservient to the corrupted priest. I've managed to get close enough to the cathedral to record some of the chanting, though listening to it fills me with a profound sense of dread and nausea. The words seem to bypass normal hearing and resonate directly in my mind, carrying meanings that human language should not be able to convey. I can feel the corruption attempting to take hold of my thoughts, whispering promises of eternal service and release from the burden of mortality. Only constant prayer to the Emperor and meditation on imperial doctrine has allowed me to maintain my sanity in proximity to this ritual. I fear that prolonged exposure would overcome even my inquisitorial training and leave me as corrupted as the infected around me. The cathedral's structure itself has been physically altered by the rituals being performed within it. The stone walls weep blood constantly, pooling on the floor in patterns that seem to shift when observed directly. The air shimmers with heat despite the cold of the underhive, and occasionally I can see glimpses of what might be other dimensions or realities superimposed over the normal architecture. My Auspex has become completely unreliable in this environment, providing readings that contradict basic physical laws. At one point, it detected temperatures exceeding the melting point of steel, while simultaneously registering sub-freezing conditions in the same location. The warp taint here is so intense that normal reality is becoming unstable. I've also discovered evidence that this corruption predates the current outbreak by a significant margin. Examining the more elaborate ritual modifications to the cathedral, I estimate that the initial corruption may have begun months or even years ago. This suggests a long-term infiltration of Kathur by chaos cultists who have been preparing for this moment. Hidden chambers beneath the cathedral contain what appears to be a network of corruption that extends throughout the Underhive. I've found maps marking locations throughout multiple districts, communication equipment for coordinating activities, and supplies of biological samples that were clearly used to create the initial plague vectors. This was never a random outbreak. It was a carefully planned assault on Kathur designed to transform the entire world into a chaos stronghold. The cultists have been infiltrating Imperial institutions, mapping the Hive's vulnerabilities, and preparing the ground for a coordinated strike that would overwhelm all defenses simultaneously. The scale of this operation suggests resources and planning capabilities that go far beyond a local cult. This bears the hallmarks of a major chaos incursion backed by significant off-world support. Kathur may be only the first target in a broader campaign to establish chaos dominance in this sector. I must now investigate the third origin point, the Bone Gardens, to complete my intelligence gathering. However, I fear that what I discover there may provide the final piece of a puzzle that reveals an even greater threat to the Imperium than I initially imagined. Emperor, give me strength to complete this mission, though I fear I may not survive to report my findings. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log entry 11, Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 7.847M41. Location, the Bone Gardens, Underhive Level 15, Hive Mortius. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. I have reached the final origin point of the outbreak, and what I have discovered here confirms my worst fears about the true nature of this catastrophe. The Bone Gardens, historically a necropolis for the Hive's earliest inhabitants, has become the epicenter of a ritual that threatens not just Kathur, but potentially the entire segmentum obscurus. The Bone Gardens originally served as the burial ground for the first Imperial colonists of Kathur, dating back nearly 4,000 years. The faithful were interred here in elaborately carved crypts and mausoleums, their remains blessed by the earliest ecclesiarchy priests to serve on the world. It was considered one of the most sacred sites on Kathur, second only to the great cathedrals of the upper spires. Now, this holy ground has been transformed into something that defies description. The infected have systematically exhumed every burial site in the necropolis, arranging the ancient bones into massive geometric patterns that cover several square kilometers of the Underhive. From my elevated observation point, I can see that these patterns form a complex ritual circle that incorporates elements of chaos mathematics. At the center of this vast bone mandala stands the most horrifying sight I have encountered in my service to the Inquisition. Rising from what was once the central mausoleum is a structure that can only be described as a demonic fortress. Built entirely from human remains spanning 4 millennia, it towers nearly 50 meters above the necropolis floor, its walls constructed from interlocked bones held together by what appears to be liquefied flesh. This fortress is not simply a building, it is a living entity. The bone walls pulse with a rhythm that matches a massive heartbeat, and I can observe blood vessels spreading across its surface like veins. Occasionally, faces appear in the wall structure itself, the skulls of the long dead animated by some unholy force and speaking in the demonic tongue. The entity that commands this site defies all attempts at description. It is neither human nor demon, but something that exists in the space between life and death, reality and the warp. I estimate its height at over 3 meters, but its form shifts constantly, as if it cannot decide which of several different body configurations it prefers to maintain. What terrifies me most about this central figure is that it retains clear signs of its former humanity. Despite the massive physical corruption, I can still discern the remains of what was once ecclesiarchy power armor and religious regalia. This was not simply a human corrupted by chaos. This was once a high-ranking member of the imperial cult, possibly even a cardinal or archdeacon. The implications are staggering. If a senior ecclesiarchy official has fallen to chaos and orchestrated this corruption of Kathur, it suggests that the heresy reaches into the highest levels of the planet's imperial government. The ritual being performed here appears to be the culmination of everything I observed at the other sites. The bone mandala is channeling warp energy generated by the corrupted temples in Sync District 7 and the Old Cathedral, focusing it into a single point of reality penetration. They are attempting to create a permanent warp rift that would allow unlimited demon incursions into real space. The infected population here numbers in the tens of thousands, all working in perfect coordination to maintain and expand the ritual structure. They move in patterns that suggest a single guiding intelligence, confirming that the plague has created a hive mind controlled by the central chaos entity. Most disturbing of all, I can observe that the ritual is nearing completion. The warp energy readings from my auspex are approaching levels that my training tells me are consistent with major demonic manifestations. The air itself shimmers with unreality, and I can see glimpses of the warp bleeding through into normal space at multiple points around the fortress. I estimate that the ritual will reach its climax within the next 12 to 18 hours. Once that occurs, Kathur will be permanently lost to chaos, and the resulting warp rift could serve as a staging ground for attacks throughout the segmentum obscurus. However, there may still be one option for preventing this catastrophe. The ritual appears to be dependent on the three coordinated sites working in harmony. If any one of the sites could be disrupted or destroyed, it might collapse the entire ritual matrix and prevent the warp rift from stabilizing. The challenge is that each site is defended by thousands of infected, and any attack would need to be perfectly timed to prevent the other sites from compensating. My duty as an inquisitorial acolyte is to serve the Emperor's will, even unto death. If I can disrupt one of these ritual sites and relay the intelligence necessary for orbital bombardment of the others, it might be possible to prevent the completion of the demonic ritual. I've made my decision. I will attempt to infiltrate the Bone Fortress and plant the melter charges I carry in my equipment pack at the ritual's focal point. The explosion may not destroy the entire structure, but it should disrupt the warp energy flow enough to destabilize the ritual matrix. Before beginning this final mission, I must transmit my findings to the Imperial forces above. The information I've gathered is too important to risk losing, even if I don't survive to deliver it personally. Emperor, if this is to be my final service, let it be worthy of the faith you have placed in me. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording and prepare for emergency data transmission. Personal log, entry 12. Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 7.847M41. Location, approach to the Bone Fortress, the Bone Gardens. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. I have begun my final approach to the Bone Fortress, and each step takes me deeper into a nightmare that challenges the very foundations of reality. The warp energy emanating from the structure is so intense that I can feel it attempting to corrupt my thoughts with every breath. The infected defenders are arranged in concentric circles around the fortress, but their positioning follows no military logic I recognize. Instead, they form geometric patterns that seem designed to channel warp energy rather than provide tactical advantage. This works in my favor, as it creates gaps in their coverage that a conventional military formation would never allow. Moving through these gaps requires perfect timing and absolute silence. The infected may lack individual intelligence, but their collective awareness is frighteningly acute. Several times, I've had to freeze in position for long minutes, while groups of them investigated areas near my hiding spots. What unnerves me most is that they're not simply patrolling randomly. The infected are performing their own ritual movements, walking in precise patterns that trace complex geometric shapes across the bone-covered ground. Occasionally, they stop and emit sounds that can barely be called human low-moaning chants that seem to resonate with the pulse of the fortress itself. As I get closer to the central structure, the physical corruption becomes more intense. The ground itself is no longer solid ferrocrete, but has been transformed into something that feels organic under my feet. It yields slightly with each step, and I can feel warmth rising from below as if the earth itself has developed a circulatory system. The bone walls of the fortress are even more horrifying up close. The skulls embedded in the structure turn to track my movement, their empty eye sockets somehow still capable of sight. I can hear whispers in dead languages coming from the mouths of the deceased, speaking words that make my skin crawl with supernatural dread. My auspex has become completely useless, providing readings that contradict basic physical laws. At one point, it indicated that I was simultaneously at ground level and floating 30 meters in the air. The device seems to be detecting multiple overlapping realities, as if the barrier between dimensions has become dangerously thin. I've managed to locate what appears to be an entrance to the fortress, a gap in the bone wall that pulses open and closed like a mouth breathing. The timing of its movements suggests it's connected to the overall ritual rhythm. If I can match my approach to this pattern, I might be able to slip inside during one of the opening phases. However, getting inside is only the beginning. Once within the fortress, I'll need to locate the ritual's focal point and plant my melter charges without alerting the central chaos entity to my presence. Given the supernatural awareness these creatures have displayed, this may be impossible, but I must try. The alternative, allowing this ritual to complete and open a permanent warp rift, is unthinkable. I've prepared my equipment for the final assault. Melter charges are armed and ready, blessed ammunition loaded, power sword consecrated for battle against the unholy. Most importantly, I've programmed servo-skull 77 Alpha to automatically transmit all recorded data to the orbital station if my life signs cease. Whatever happens in the next hour, the Imperium will have the intelligence it needs to respond appropriately to this threat. Whether that response comes in time to save Kathur remains to be seen. The breathing portal is opening again. I move now to serve the Emperor's will. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, end recording. Personal log, entry 13. Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date, 7.847M41. Location, interior of the Bone Fortress, the Bone Gardens. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, begin recording. I am inside the Bone Fortress, and what I have found here defies all sanity. The interior is not simply a building constructed from human remains. It is a living organism that has grown around and through the bones of the dead. The walls pulse with a heartbeat that shakes the entire structure, and veins of corrupted blood flow through channels carved in the ancient skulls. The central chamber rises in a spiral pattern, following the same geometric progression I observed in the external bone mandala. Each level of the spiral contains different ritual activities, all focused on channeling warp energy toward the apex, where the corrupted ecclesiarchy figure conducts the primary ceremony. On the first level, I observed hundreds of infected arranged in meditation poses, their bodies completely motionless, but their minds clearly engaged in some form of psychic communion. The air around them shimmers with warp energy, and occasionally I can see ghostly images of demons flickering in and out of existence above their heads. The second level contains what can only be described as a blasphemous library. Tomes bound in human skin contain ritual knowledge written in blood, while scrolls made from preserved human organs detail the specific procedures for opening permanent warp rifts. I recognized several texts that are mentioned in the most classified inquisitorial archives books that should have been destroyed millennia ago. The third level houses the ritual machinery itself, a complex array of devices that blend chaos sorcery with corrupted imperial technology. I can see cogitator units that have been infected with demonic spirits, servo-skulls that have been transformed into floating repositories of dark knowledge, and communication arrays that appear to be in contact with entities beyond the material realm. Most disturbing of all, I've discovered that this fortress is not an isolated facility. The communication equipment indicates active contact with similar installations on at least 6 other worlds throughout the segmentum obscurus. Kathur is not the only target of this coordinated assault. It's part of a massive chaos offensive designed to establish multiple warp rifts simultaneously. The scale of this threat is beyond anything I imagined when I began this investigation. This appears to be a coordinated campaign orchestrated by one of the chaos gods themselves, Nurgle, given the plague-based nature of the initial assault. As I climb toward the fortress's apex, the warp corruption becomes so intense that I can feel it affecting my physical form. My skin burns where it's exposed to the air, and I can see my own flesh beginning to show signs of the same decay that marks the infected. Only constant prayer and meditation on Imperial doctrine is keeping me functional. The sounds from the apex chamber are growing louder, chanting in the demonic tongue mixed with screams that may or may not be coming from human throats. The ritual is clearly approaching its climax, and I estimate I have perhaps minutes before the warp rift becomes irreversible. I've reached the final level before the apex chamber. From here, I can see the corrupted ecclesiarchy figure conducting the ultimate ritual. It stands before an altar made from the bones of saints, desecrating holy relics while channeling massive amounts of warp energy into a growing tear in reality. The rift is already several meters wide and growing rapidly. Through it, I can see glimpses of the warp itself, a roiling mass of psychic energy populated by demon entities waiting to pour through into real space. If this portal reaches critical size, nothing will be able to close it from this side. I can see my target, a series of warp-focus crystals arranged around the altar that appear to be stabilizing the rift. If I can destroy those crystals with my melter charges, it should cause a cascade failure that collapses the ritual and seals the portal. However, reaching the crystals will require crossing the central chamber, while the corrupted entity is actively conducting its ritual. The psychic energies in that space are so intense that exposure to them will likely kill me within seconds. But there is no choice. My duty to the Emperor requires that I attempt this mission regardless of personal cost. I've set my melter charges to detonate on a delay, which should give me enough time to plant them and begin my withdrawal. I'm transmitting this final log entry now in case I don't survive the next few minutes. To whoever receives this recording, Kathur must be subjected to immediate orbital bombardment. The corruption here is too advanced to be cleansed by conventional means. The entire world must be sacrificed to prevent the spread of this heresy. Furthermore, the other worlds identified in the Chaos Communication Network must be investigated immediately. This threat extends far beyond a single planet and may require sector-wide military response. I go now to serve the Emperor's will. If I fall, let it be in service to humanity's future. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, maintain recording and prepare for emergency transmission. Personal log entry 14 Valdeon Golter, Acolyte of the Ordo Sepulchrum. Date 7.84 7M41. Location Apex Chamber, Bone Fortress. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, continue recording. I have entered the Apex Chamber, and I now understand the true horror of what the servants of chaos have accomplished here. The corrupted ecclesiarchy figure is not simply conducting a ritual. It is in the process of physical transformation into a greater demon of Nurgle. The entity retains enough of its human consciousness to recognize my presence, and it has begun speaking in High Gothic mixed with the demonic tongue. Its words are an obscene mockery of imperial prayers, invoking the Emperor's name while pledging service to the plague god. "Welcome, faithful servant," it says, its voice like the sound of corpses breathing. "You arrive just in time to witness the birth of a new age. Kathur shall become the first garden of Nurgle in this sector, and from here his blessings shall spread to cleanse the Imperium of its false devotion. The warp rift has grown to nearly 10 meters in diameter, and demons are beginning to manifest on this side of the portal. I can see plague bearers emerging from the warp, followed by larger entities that I don't have time to identify. The invasion has already begun. I've managed to reach the warp focus crystals, but planting the melter charges has proven more difficult than anticipated. The crystals are protected by some form of psychic barrier that causes intense pain when touched. My hands are already showing signs of corruption from the brief contact. The corrupted entity has noticed my actions and is beginning to direct its attention towards stopping me. I can feel its psychic pressure attempting to paralyze my thoughts and turn me into another servant of chaos. Only my inquisitorial training and absolute faith in the Emperor are keeping me functional. First charge planted. The psychic backlash has left me partially blinded, but I can still move. The entity is beginning to approach my position, moving with the deliberate pace of something that knows victory is inevitable. Second charge planted. I can feel the corruption spreading through my body now, racing along my circulatory system like liquid fire. My left arm has become completely numb, and I can see the flesh taking on the grayish pallor of the infected. The entity speaks again. Your sacrifice honors Nurgle's design, loyal servant. Your flesh shall feed the garden, and your soul shall serve eternally in the plague god's realm. There is no shame in accepting the inevitable. Third charge planted. Only one more to complete the pattern. The demons emerging from the rift have begun to notice my presence, but they seem content to watch rather than intervene. Perhaps they believe the corruption has already claimed me. I can no longer feel my legs, but I can still crawl toward the final crystal. The timer on my charges shows 6 minutes remaining. Even if I complete the planting, I won't have time to escape the blast radius. Final charge planted. The melter charges are armed and synchronized. In 4 minutes and 30 seconds, this chamber and everything in it will be vaporized. The ritual will fail, the rift will collapse, and Kathur will be saved from immediate demonic invasion. The corrupted entity has realized what I've accomplished. Its roar of rage shakes the entire fortress, and I can see the warp rift beginning to fluctuate as it loses concentration on maintaining the ritual. The demons that have already manifested are becoming unstable, their forms flickering between reality and the warp. I'm losing consciousness now. The corruption has reached my brain, and I can feel my thoughts becoming fragmented. But servo-skull 77 Alpha continues to record, and my final transmission will carry all the intelligence I've gathered to the Imperial forces above. I can see the demon army on the other side of the rift preparing for full invasion, but they will be too late. Emperor, I have served as best I could. Let my death serve your will and protect your people from the darkness that threatens them. I commit my soul to your judgment and my data to your service, for the Emperor and the future of humanity. Servo-skull 77 Alpha, initiate emergency transmission to Inquisitor Bastion Chaos. Authorization, Golter Theta 997. Priority, immediate exterminatus authorization required. End final recording.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Grim Tales 40K story. Like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more.